Hey everybody, this is me, Undead Viking, coming to you with another video review. The game that I'm reviewing today is called Forces of Evil. Forces of Evil. And I've got another cool Forces of Evil, and I've got another cool Forces of Evil. I don't have a game box for you because this is a game that is currently in Kickstarter. I guess I do have a game box, but here it's much like the Spinal Tap album. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go watch that movie. Forces of Evil is a game for 2 to 6 people. Each person will be taking on the role of an incredibly evil being, be it a horrible succubus, or an otherworldly horror, or a cursed necromancer, and there's several more here. And each person is going to create a dungeon that they're going to use to cultivate their evil and cultivate their power. And then they're going to bring about the Armageddon of the good world, you know, because they're down in the dungeon, of course, they're going to corrupt the world and bring about the end of all that is good and holy. You are the bad guy in this game, and this is kind of a recurring theme lately. It seems like there's lots of games out there where you get to be the bad person. And you get to regale yourself against against the good people. I can remember, and this game obviously is going to be compared to some other games, but I mean, like, remember Dungeon Keeper, if you played that. An amazingly good game and a horrible app, I guess. They just re-released like an app based on Dungeon Keeper, and I guess it's awful. But Dungeon Keeper was a great game where you basically created a dungeon and good people would come and try to attack it, and you'd defeat them and you'd move on and so on and so forth. And this game is that, but it's more of kind of a being the best evil person, if you will. You know, cultivating your power and your treasure and what have you, so that when Armageddon does occur, and there isn't, like, you can like run into problems where, like, if you aren't able to defend yourself well, you can you know, be set upon by a great deal of the good people, if you will. But you know, ultimately the game ends the same way. An Armageddon occurs, and then at that point all the evil has won, and then you determine who the best person is. So, but all of that is something I'm going to go into further, I guess, when I show you how to play the game. And then we'll come back here like we always do, and I'll tell you exactly what I think of the game. And hopefully at some point you'll see something about this game that you like, and then you can go and donate some money to the Kickstarter, get this game published. Then you can get a copy of it for your gaming shelf yourself. Your gaming shelf yourself. Ugh. At that point. So, all right. Well, here's how to play Forces of Evil. This is the game board for Forces of Evil, and this is a prototype game board. This was sent to me by the designer. The end result, or the end published version, I'm sure will look a lot different, but the game is functionally the same. I'm sure the art will change, and these won't be pieces of paper, they'll be actual game boards and what have you, but I always say that just so you know what you're looking at may or may not be indicative of the final production. Just quickly, up here, this is where the good guys are. These are the garrisons that contain the heroes that will eventually attack the different dungeons. Fighter, priest, mage, rogue. Pretty standard, obviously, the quintessential 4 types of adventurers. When they get activated, they move into the town. And then when attacks happen, they then leave the town and then attack the separate dungeons of the players. I'm just setting up like a 2-player game in this case, so there's just 2 of each of those in the garrisons. There's 1 for each player. This game handles up to 6, and it handles up to 6 pretty well, actually. But if there ever isn't enough, like there's no warriors in these one of these 4 garrisons here, the garrison then is considered destroyed, meaning that you've killed all of that type of hero. There's just none left. You can still get them. They come from like far off lands, if you will, but the garrison is destroyed as far as it being coming from like the town that you are nearby, if you will. This is important because if you ever destroy all 4 of the garrisons, the game, that signifies the end of the game, meaning that you've kind of destroyed the goodness, if you will, and then that'll go into the Armageddon phase of the game, and that's when you determine who wins the game. You have these cards of darkness and cards of light. Cards of darkness, you are allowed to draw those on your turn. You get 1 for free, and then you can pay influence to draw another one. There's these 4 action spots, and these are the 4 cards that are placed there at the beginning. When you draw those, if it isn't an event, you actually cover up one of the spots with the card. If for some reason you would ever discard the card that was on there, you would then use the one below it. So, you know, it's kind of interesting how, like, the action spots change as the game progresses. Over here, same thing. With the card of light, you'll turn cards over from this deck, and then you'll be placing them in these 2 spots. Right now, there's just these peasants in those 2 locations. That really doesn't mean anything. Basically, what happens is, like, sometimes you will, to activate, like, these guys, so they move into the town, like, you'll turn over a card that says, like, Journeyman Mage, so to speak. And so you put the Journeyman Mage right there, and it says 1 mage up here. And what that means is that a mage comes out of the garrison and then goes into the town. So the next time we have an attack, those things will happen. If you were to pull that over and there wasn't a garrison here, you would just take a mage out of the box and place it in. That's like an adventurer from a far off land. Now, the interesting thing is that if you then are able on a turn to cover up that with a peasant's card, you would then put that back. So you can kind of control like what you're fighting, if you will. You can keep like you can work at keeping the adventurers out of the town if you're able to draw the right cards out of the card of light. You have to have like the person that is going to represent you. I've chosen this Cursed Necromancer here, but there's all these different ones, you know, Primeval Worm, Fallen Angel, you know, and so on and so forth. And these, they all have an ability. These abilities that are on the bottom, you know, they tell you what kind of, how much influence their max influence is. Usually it's 2 + 1 for every room that you control. So at the beginning you have 1 room, your dungeon entrance, and so everybody has a maximum of 3. And so you use this to kind of represent yourself. And like I said, I have a Cursed Necromancer down here representing this dungeon. And theoretically there'd be somebody I'd be playing over there and they'd have one as well. The dungeon entrances are the first room you'll always have. The number up here on all rooms tells you how many creatures can be in that room, and it tells you how many can actually fight, like how big the room is. That, you know, so if there was like 5 monsters in this room, and they're like, and 4 adventurers showed up, only 3 of the adventurers and 3 of the monsters would be able to meet and fight in a row. Now, if some of them were ranged, they can be behind and make attacks, but the frontline fighters would only be able to have 3. And so, like, it also tells you what you get to start with. So, like, this one, 2 skeletons. You start with 2 treasure in this one, some goblins, a cockatrice, giant spiders. You know, so you can start with. And I should mention as well that there's this handy sheet. And I don't know if this is going to be, but it tells you what each one of these monsters can do, like what their upkeep is. Like hobgoblins require a treasure, you know, zombies require none, zombies are fearless, things like that. And so you can see, like, to keep them happy when you do your dungeon maintenance, you have to be able to pay them. And some, like these goblins, like 1/3 of treasure. So it's like, it's not even like, so like 1 goblin only requires 1/3 of a treasure, so you have 3 goblins for a treasure in that case. And treasure is just notified by these little diamonds. When you gather it, you have to place it in a room, and then that treasure then you know, satisfies that monster. These are zombies that I have here in this first room, so they don't really need anything because, well, they're zombies. But if I had, like, say, a hobgoblin in there, you know, I'd have to have this treasure in the room to make him happy. He doesn't, like, spend the treasure. You know, monsters never spend their treasure. They just always keep it in their room, so when adventurers show up, they can kill them and take that said treasure. That's the name of the game when you're delving into a dungeon, right? So, turns are really easy. They just follow a very, very simple path. What happens is that each player, you pick somebody to be the first player. Just, you know, roll dice, because obviously there's combat, so we have dice in this game. But you roll dice, and then you figure out who the first player is. And they can take 2 actions, and they can do 1 plot. Now, and they don't have to do it in any specified order. You can do it. You can take 1 action, do your plot, then do another action, if you will. So, and you don't have to do the plot part of the situation. You can just choose not to, because the plot actually forces you to draw these cards. And when you draw cards, obviously, like, good and bad things can happen. But you also, if you draw a card, if you want to do a plot, like you say you draw a card. Let's just draw this one. See here. And so here we have Menagerie. Recruit up to as many cockatrices as you already have in your dungeon for 1 influence each. Or recruit 1 manticore for 3 influence. Or score creatures. So this is actually, so basically what it says is you take this and you got to cover one up. So we're going to cover up Dark Ritual, I say. So, but you have these options. And you can recruit a manticore for 3 influence. So you pay 3 influence and you get a manticore, which is a pretty good, powerful creature. Or you can score creatures. And if you score in creatures, you take the type of creature, and the person who has the most of that creature would get the first prize, and then the second and third, and so forth. And you go down the list. And then if you tie, you both get the same, and so forth. So, but this is a card that, when it has this little marking on there, that tells you what action that particular card can do. Now, since that's my first plot, like, do I want to draw another card? If I want to draw another card, you'd spend one of these influence tokens and draw another card, but I'm fine. Whatever. Let's just go on to the actions. So, the actions are pretty simple. You can expand your dungeon, which means that, like, there's these 3 cards down here, these dungeon rooms that are available for expansion, plus a big deck there. You can either take one of these 3 cards and add it to your dungeon, or you can draw the top card off the dungeon room. So, these cards, like, some of them are just fairly nondescript. Like here you just have a large cavern. It can have up to 8 creatures, 4 can fight, but really nothing else. But still, you know, you can add a lot of monsters to your dungeon in that way. Here you have a chasm. You know, you can have up to 6. It's a kind of a choke point, because only 2 can fight. And then it says, any non-flying friendly unit that rolls a 1 is immediately slain before rolling damage. So, like, basically they fell into the chasm if you roll that when you're fighting. And finally, just can't really grab this, I apologize. But here we have the goblin tunnels. And you can 6 and 3. But if this room is empty or contains only monsters, you can recruit 2 goblins for 3 influence. So you can just have this, and then you could use it to recruit goblins. Now, the interesting thing to note is you can see it has this little check mark that allows you to use it. So if I were to build the goblin tunnels, so let's say I paid an influence, and I built the goblin tunnels, I took that, and I could place that. Now, after I've placed my dungeon, the next time I build one, I can put it here, or I can put it here. I mean, the entrance always has to be the entrance, and this little icon, this Cursed Necromancer, is considered to be like me at the heart of my dungeon, so that has to be at the very end. That's like, I'm the boss monster waiting for fight. So now we put down another one there. We always refill. Now, see how it has an action. Now, when I take an action, I can use this, but my opponents can use this action as well. So what they can do is they can then use that action to, you know, recruit goblins, obviously. But if they do so and they pay influence, they have to pay me the influence instead of just turning it into the bank. So any card that is up and available, except for these, your Forces of Evil card has some actions that you can take that only you can do. Everything else is kind of fair game. So you can expand your dungeon, as I said, and that's how you do that. The plot, you can do it any time. The other thing that you can do is you can build your influence as an action. And you can take one influence and draw a card of light. And you continue to do this until you either draw an event or an attack, or you reach your maximum influence. Like right now, I'm already at 3 influence, but if I had less, let's say, and I wanted to expand my influence, and that's kind of like you just exerting your evil monsterliness or whatever, and you're drawing the attention of good. So we turn a card over, and we'd say, missionaries, here's the little trumpet saying that, it's asking for more people. So I take this and I put it in an empty slot like that. There's one priest for each one. So these 2 clerics move to the town. So if there's ever an attack, then those particular priests are there in town, ready to help out with the attack. Now, when you draw an attack card, usually, and the attack card itself will tell you what everybody gets as well. But in the case of this, then each person's going to get more stuff because it's in the town. So, if, say, I were to do it again, and we'd see what card we get. And, well, here you go. Test of Courage. It's an attack, you can see, because it's got the 2 crossed swords. And it says, each player gets a fighter. So each of us is going to have a fighter that's going to enter our dungeon and try to fight us. And then, but any player who has no tier 3 minions in his dungeon can avoid this attack. So if you didn't have a tier 3 creature, and here, let me find a teach. You can see there's the different tiers. Like, see, tier 3, the Manticore is tier 3, and the Wraith is tier 3. So if you didn't have a tier 3 creature, you wouldn't have to worry about that attack. You could say it's just not going to happen to you. However, you can choose to have it attack you, because you can actually get, if you're able to repel the invaders, you're actually able to get influence or treasure from doing so. So there's an attack, so we would immediately then move into attack situation. Each person gets a fighter, and we're going to have one of these priests come along with that fighter and attack each person's dungeon. So, and this is like and when that happens, everything obviously kind of stops, and we move on into the attack roll. I should mention, and I totally forgot this, and I do apologize. When you add a room to your dungeon, you have to do dungeon maintenance. And what that means is you kind of can move your creatures around and put them in different places where you want them to be. But it also means that you have to upkeep and pay your creatures as well. So it's a very important thing to remember. And the important thing is, as well, is when after an attack occurs, and the heroes come in and attack your dungeon, you'll do a dungeon maintenance after that attack as well, because your monsters just defended your location. They're going to be dispersed or whatever. Some of them are going to be most likely killed, and so you need to kind of put your people where you need them to be. And also, once again, you have to pay their upkeep. You got to give them their treasure, if you will. All right, so that's kind of like how turns work. Obviously, combat plays a big role. So let me show you a quick combat here. Okay, so combat. Combat is really, really quite simple. So, for example, let's just say we had this combat going on. And we have here a goblin, and a hobgoblin, and a rogue, and a fighter. Now, it's kind of tough to tell the difference between the fighter. You can see it's kind of rounded. It's kind of a diamond shape, if you will, because it stands up like this. That means they use a D8. Obviously, the square guy uses a D6, and this one uses a D4. And so what it comes down to is that you have each unit kind of squares off, and you get to pick how they're going to square off. So if this was attacking, we'd have these 2 attacking and these 2 attacking. Now, in some situations, like if it was just one fighter, like both of these guys would attack him. If for some reason, like the same thing had occurred like this, both those would attack them. So let me just go, and there's some special abilities that like rogues and priests have, and I'll explain those in just a moment. But so what happens is you just roll for each one. So in the case of the rogue, which is a D6, and the goblin, which is a D4, we'll roll those dice. and like the white is obviously, so you just roll those. And so you'd see we get a 5 for the rogue and a 3 for the goblin. So pretty simply, you know, because he rolled higher, he would hit. And he does a point of damage. Most of these things only do a point of damage, but they can gang up and attack. A bunch of them can attack a single creature. But goblins have 1 hit point, and so he would actually kill the goblin. And in the case of the fighter and the fighter and the hobgoblin, we roll a d8 and a d6, and we have a 4 and a 1, and so that would be the same situation. The fighter would hit, and he would do a point of damage to the goblin, and you can tell how many hit points they have because of the fact that, like, you would go like that, and then you rotate it like so, and so you can see then like the 1 goes on top, and so now you'd have a situation where you would just have the 1 hobgoblin versus 2, and so you actually then add up the scores. And so, like, the hobgoblin would go and get a 2, and it doesn't look very good for him because then his opponents have a d8 and a d6, and all they got to do is roll higher than that, and they're going to do their damage to him. Now, as you can see, though, it is possible if you get lucky, you know, he could have rolled like a 6, and they could have gotten like a total of 5, and then he could have done damage to him and like to one of them, and like you'd say, okay, well then you do. Kill the rogue because he's got 1 hit point, and so you do that, and as long as if the heroes are able to defeat all of your defenses in a single room, what will happen then is that they will ransack the room, meaning they basically take the treasure and what have you in the room, and then they move on to the next spot, and then hopefully you have more minions that can protect against that, and then you beat them down, or if they keep moving, if they eventually make it to your dungeon heart. Unfortunately, what happens then is each one actually attacks you, and you can't kill you. But what they do is each of them will take an influence, and they'll if you have any influence remaining, and if they were to like ever knock you down to the point where you had no influence, and there was still more there, you would go into what's called a deficit, meaning that you would have to pay back the influence that you lost. Before you can actually start doing anything, after that attack takes place. Now, I should mention that you can actually go into a deficit on purpose. Like, you could take an action that would cost you a lot of your influence that you don't have, but the same thing happens. You can't do anything until you're actually able to pay off the deficit of influence that you have. If that happens, obviously that's bad, and you lose, but they, like I said, they don't kill you. Then they leave and take your treasure, and they go off, and they go back into the garrisons that they came from if they did, and they cheer themselves and for being defeated you. However, if, like, say that combat went a different route, and say, like the goblin got lucky and say rolled a 4, and I should mention that if you ever roll the same number, so like say if the goblin got a 4 and the rogue got a 4, meaning they tied, they'd both do damage to each other, and in this case they'd kill each other off because they both have 1 hit point. But let's say rolled a 1, so the goblin kills the rogue, and maybe the fighter and the hobgoblin both rolled the same number, and so then they both did a point of damage to each other. So then you'd have a situation where you wouldn't have the rogue anymore, but you'd have him, and you'd have this goblin with 1 hit point, and you'd have this guy with 1, and so this guy would be at 1 as well. And so you'd have a situation where you'd roll a 4-sided and a 6-sided for the bad guys, which is you, and an 8-sided for that. So let's see if I can get lucky here. 4 and a 6. Oh, 9. He can't. There's no way he can beat it. So you roll. You got a 4. So you kill it. Okay. So then you defeated the bad guys, or the good guys, if you will, that are coming in to try to destroy you. After you've done that, you get the choice of either taking 2 influence or taking a treasure, and then you get to place. You either take the influence and put it on your card, or you put the treasure on one of your spots when you do your dungeon maintenance. If you successfully defended yourself and you took part in the attack, you then get to do the dungeon maintenance and then place the treasure along with putting your monsters wherever you like in your dungeon where you'd like them to be. And at that point, then you have to do your upkeep and like pay it. So that's when you actually, you might want to take a treasure, because then you can pay for your, if you lost one, perhaps maybe one of your rooms got ransacked and you lost a treasure, things like that. And so then you'd have to make sure that you are able to keep your troops. If you ever have a situation where like you can't pay for your troops, obviously then you have to dismiss that particular minion and they go away. The same thing goes if you don't have enough room for the minions as well. There's a couple things, like I said, like the mages, they have magical attacks, which is obviously very good. Then they're ranged. Priests, so they can hang back and still get to attack, and you can't really do anything with them unless you have one as well. They have priests are do really well versus they have magical attacks when they're facing undead, which is obviously better. They can, if they're supporting a unit, meaning they're behind them in the front lines, they give +1 hit point to whoever is in front of them, which is always good, for the priests. Not good for you, obviously. And then rogues, actually, if they're behind a unit and they're supporting it, they actually add 1 to their roll when they roll to attack. So there's different things that you have to worry about as far as the tactics go as well. But it seems way more complicated than it is. And more often than not, everybody just kind of handles their own little combat to their side. And if you're not worried about somebody cheating, but nobody's going to cheat, don't worry about that. You resolve your combat. You figure out who successfully fought off the good guys and who didn't, and then you take your spoils, do your dungeon maintenance, and what have you. And that's pretty much how the game progresses. Each person takes that turn. They do that. They react. They build up their dungeon. There's different things in here that actually allow you to affect other people's dungeons as well. You can take influence and things like that. And you go until either you run out of these cards. If you run out of those cards, you go into the Armageddon. Or if you clear out all the garrisons, you do that as well. And that triggers the end game. And that's when you total up who was the best at being evil. Now, if Armageddon was triggered because all these garrisons were destroyed, meaning there weren't any units left, then you just go right into the final scoring. If it's because you triggered Armageddon, there's actually cards that you can draw that'll trigger it earlier, and also if you go through the entire deck, and there's still units in the garrisons. Now, and I should mention that garrisons can get replenished as well with cards. Like, remember what I said, you can have heroes come from distant lands and what have you. They can end up in the town, and then if you cover a peasant, they go back into the garrison. So you can actually replenish the garrison as the game progresses. But if it's destroyed, though, you can never replenish the garrison. Once it's destroyed, it's destroyed. But if you have a situation where there's still units left, all of those hit the town, and you have one big final attack where each person will get attacked by heroes. And then at that point is when you will determine who wins. And basically what it comes down to winning is who's got the most influence. And then each person does have a final scoring. And usually here it's for the Curse of Necromancer, the final scoring is by this symbol up here, it's undead. So whoever's, if he's got the if he has the most undead in there's the scoring before, remember, that has the 3 numbers. It goes 5, 3, 1. So if he has the most undead, he gets 5 points for that. Next person, if he had the second most undead, 3, and so on and so forth. And then each player scores on that thing too, not just him. So if you were crafty and somebody else, had a different type of monster, say the goblins and hobgoblins and ogres, and you were able to get a few of those, maybe you could score on that as well. And then if you have 0, you don't get any points, obviously. But then what you do is you count the number of influence points you have left, any heroes you killed, because when you kill them, you keep them as trophies, and any treasures you have left. You add those to your final scoring. total all that together, whoever's got the most was the most evil force of evil in the game of Forces of Evil, and you then win the game. All right, so there you go. That's how you play Forces of Evil. There's a lot more to it. Like I said, there's lots of cards, lots of stuff going on, and I did, it's like I didn't go totally in depth into every single rule. I do welcome you to go ahead and check out the Kickstarter, check out the game, and read the rules yourself. It's a pretty straightforward game, but it's a heck of a lot of fun. But let me tell you why I think it's a heck of a lot of fun. Here are my conclusion. This one goes to 11. Alright. Forces of Evil. Okay. Ultimately, we're going to compare this game to Dungeon Lords. I know a lot of people are going to say, oh, this game sounds like Dungeon Lords. But, I mean, I'll address that in just a second. But first I'm going to tell you what I like. There's a lot of things about the game that I really enjoy. Obviously, I just like the theme. I like being the bad guy. I like being in charge of a dungeon. I like building that dungeon. I like the whole aspect of recruiting evil creatures to do my bidding. I even like the combat because I get to roll dice and I get to decide who's fighting who and what's fighting what. I get to design like my minions and place them in the places where they are able to do the most damage and do the most good for me in those situations. That whole process is one that I really enjoy. I really enjoy taking your turn and the whole push your luck of drawing the cards, and spending your influence and things like that. And I enjoy that kind of the influence like resource and like going into debt on the resource, just to spend a bunch, knowing you're going to get some back, but you're like I think what are the words called? The words in the book. It's like you become like subjugated or something. I think that's the word. I'm using the wrong word there, but you basically kind of go into for lack of a better term, into kind of a decline period where you have to overspend what you have access to. In order to be able to actually do something in a later turn. And I also like that whole process of when you do gather influence, that's forcing you to draw the cards that are actually going to hurt you. And because obviously you're sending out messages and things like that to recruit evil beings to come to your dungeon, and so it's like when you play D&D and they mention, oh, up on that mountain every once in a while you can see weird spells being cast and things being done up there. We need to send some adventurers up there to find out what's going on. And I guess that kind of ties into the whole process I have here, and this is going to tie into the comparison to Dungeon Lords, is that I really felt the theme come home in this game. I mean, I really felt like I was an evil overlord in charge of a dungeon, and I'm trying to bring about the end to all that is good and wonderful and noble and that is above me. Or if I am in the top of the mountain, down below in the valley, and what have you. And I think that's why, I mean, Dungeon Lords, don't get me wrong, I enjoy that game a great deal. It's one of my, if I ever did a top 50, it's definitely in there and pretty high up on the list. But that's a decidedly Euro game. I mean, it is a very thematic Euro game, but that's a cube pusher. That's a resource management. That's just kind of figuring out a trap and figuring out your best equation on how to fight the good guys that are coming. This game is firmly in my dice rolling Ameritrash roots, and that might turn off a few of you people, and I understand that, but I have to be honest. But this game, feels like I'm throwing dice and I'm fighting, and I'm nice, wonderful, gritty fantasy feel to it, and that's probably the biggest selling point for me. It's the game is not difficult to understand. I mean, it isn't the super tactical combat. I mean, you do line your guys up to fight who you're going to fight, but I mean, it's just a dice fest when it gets to that point. And so you can have one lowly goblin fight off 2-3 adventurers if you just roll well enough, if you just get lucky enough. And I like that aspect of it. And by the same accord, you can have some plucky thief that manages to come in and run roughshod through your dungeon, just because they get a few lucky rolls and things like that. So the whole process of the game is a lot of fun, and it does exactly what I think. What Dungeon Lords didn't have for me, this game supplies for me, and that's why I love the game as much as I do. And that's why my game group, who are firmly an RPG fantasy gaming group really enjoyed the heck out of this one. You know, I guess I can't. I mean, that's the nuts and bolts. That's why I like it. I mean, I can see somebody, you know, spending a little bit of time and making some miniatures for this and everything like that. I think that the tokens that you have work perfectly well. I have tons of little goblins and things like that, and I've thought about digging them out, but I haven't done it. I think I might very well do it at some point, especially after I get a published version of this game. I really see myself pimping this game out for that purpose. But, you know, as it is, the game is fantastic. I also love the idea that this is eminently expandable. I don't know what the publisher is looking to do, but I mean, give us some more of these evil guys, give us some more creatures, give us advanced heroes, things like that. There's all kinds of awesome stuff that you could add to this game to make it even better than it already is. And I know that he's got a bunch of things clunking around in his mind. I'm really excited to see what's going to come in the future. So there you go. Forces of Evil. Here, I'll show you the Forces of Evil, or Forces of Evil, or Forces of Evil. And, you know, go check out the Kickstarter. Check out all the different other videos and pictures and what have you. Check out the page on the Board Game Geek. You can check out what he's got there. If you have any questions or any kind of concerns about the game, please post them. I'll answer those to the best of my ability. I'm certain that the publisher and the creator of the game will be more than happy to answer those as well. So, as always, thank you very much for taking the time to watch this video. I greatly appreciate it. This was Undead Viking. This is my gaming dojo in Moorhead, Minnesota. And from here in my basement, I will say goodbye until we meet again. All right, you have yourself an awesome day. Bye-bye.